By asking you to give us a sort of quick primer um, concerning the difference between sex and gender and how they in turn relate to the concepts of male and female. A lot of people find this issue something of a mystery, so I wondered if we just
Sure.
sort of set the scene.
You're meant to find it a mystery. That's part of the point, that the campaigners like to be very unclear about things. So sex is a biological term, and it's a term that has its place properly understood in evolutionary biology. Once you get past single-cell organisms and a few unusual fungi, species have two sexes. Male is to do with the small motile gametes, which are called sperm in animals and pollen in plants. And female are the large immotile or stationary gametes, which are called eggs, or I forget what they call them in flowers. It's not quite an equivalent. And those are two reproductive strategies. So the short definition of sex is a reproductive strategy. And in some species, the two reproductive strategies are in the same individual, like in worms. In mammals, they're in different individuals, all mammals. Some animals can change sex, some animals can't change sex, including all mammals. So that's sex. It's a biological term, it's an objective term, and it's to do with reproductive strategies. It isn't to do with whether you can reproduce or have reproduced or what stage of your reproductive cycle you're at. It's which reproductive strategy your body was designed to support. Gender sometimes just means sex. Americans say gender when they mean sex because they're afraid that you think they mean sexy sex. And a lot of people use that just as a synonym. A tendency in feminism from the 1960s and 70s is to use gender to mean the social constructs around the two sexes. So some people would say, sex is the reality and gender is the prison, or gender is, gender is the bars sort of thing around what the two sexes are allowed to do. And, that's kind of an observation. Sometimes once you start talking about social roles, you switch from saying what people are allowed to do into what people should do. Like that, you're womanly if you're a mother and you're not womanly if you're not a mother. That would be gender, but gender understood as something that's imposed on you, or something that, like the famous opening line of Simone de Beauvoir's book, one is not born but becomes a woman. What she's saying is you're born female and then you are put through this like toothpaste tube manufacturing system, and out the other end comes a proper woman. And you've been maybe distorted into that. So lots of different meanings, and then finally we've landed on what now is what people tend to mean now, which is gender identity, which is the opposite of any of these objective or outward things. So objective would be sex, outward would be gender roles or gender norms, and then gender identity is meant to be something you feel, that inside yourself you feel that you are a man or you are a woman. Nobody else could say that to you. Nobody can contradict you. It doesn't mean that you have to act in a womanly or manly way. It doesn't really mean anything as far as I can tell. So I've called it a sexed soul in my book. Souls don't exist if you're an atheist like me, but even if you aren't an atheist, how a soul will be sexed, I don't know, because souls don't have reproductive strategies. But anyway, that's where they seem to have landed. Very potted history there.
And what is it that the transgender activists stroke ideologues, as opposed to people claiming a trans identity who might not be wanting to politicise that, what is it they're, in a nutshell, demanding, typically?
I mean, the reason that we call our organisation Sex Matters is, the short version is, in lots of situations, sex doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which sex the people sitting around here listening to me are. You can tell I'm female because you're not blind, and we're an evolved species in which it matters to be able to see what sex people are. So you can easily and effortlessly look around the room and see what sex everybody is. That said, it doesn't matter. Once you try and go to places where you're going to undress, or where you choose a sexual partner, or if you're in a sensitive space like a prison, it does matter. So sex matters, and in some situations, and when sex matters, it's sex that matters. That's what we'd say. So to a trans activist, and I take the point about the distinction between trans-identified people and people who adhere to what is basically a sort of a neo-religion, to them sex doesn't matter. What matters is gender identity. So the question of who you are, how you should be categorised, and therefore how you should be treated by others in situations where sex counts, that should be your gender identity, not your sex. And many of them go as far as saying sex isn't real. 2 billion years of evolution would say otherwise, but anyway, if you listen to Judith Butler, she would say that sex is a very bad idea, by the way. If you listen to Judith Butler, she would say that sex is a social construct, that sex is something that is created in a way at the moment that a child is born, and the medical professionals look and say, you know, it's a girl. It's a bit like saying, and now I thee wed. It's an utterance that brings a social reality into being. Now, you could say that's what Simone de Beauvoir was saying. She was saying when you look and you say it's a girl, you don't just mean reproductive strategy. You mean dress her in pink, tell her to be slim, blame her if she gets raped, you know, tell her she's got to be a mother, tell her a PhD in mathematics isn't the right thing for her. But, you know, like underlying that, I would say, there is sex. And you could consider changing those social norms, but you can't consider changing the sex. They say the opposite, that the social construct is the real thing and the underlying sex is not real. And they want everybody to go along with that. To the extent that it's just you believing it about yourself, it's the same as saying that you're Orthodox Jewish or Muslim or a libertarian or whatever. Other people can go, yes, fascinating, or I don't give a toss. But what they want is everybody to be forced to go along with it. That's the thing you have to understand, is that there are no situations in modern day life, now that we don't have things like restrictions on women for voting or, you know, different pension ages or that sort of thing. The only places where sex matters are in an interaction with other people. So what they're saying is that other people must accept you as the sex that you say you are. There is no transgender identity in solitude on your own. You couldn't have one individual on a desert island who is trans-identified on their own. They can do what they like, of course. They'll menstruate if they're female and not if they're male and that sort of thing. It's other people. So at the beginning of the book I say, gender self-ID is a misnomer. It's the demand that other people identify you as the gender you say you are.
And so that relates in many ways to the whole postmodernist idea that reality is constructed ideologically, and therefore that words potentially have a coercive power. So I suppose once you believe that, then you have to then try to restrict what people are allowed to say, because otherwise you can't create the new reality.
You'd hope that there was a break between those two, because words do have a coercive power. I mean, once you call somebody, when you give somebody a prison sentence, the fact is they're now an ex-con. And that has impact on their future. It has an impact if they want to get a job and so on. Like, the word has created a social reality. But it's a long way from there to words are only things that create a social reality. There's no underlying reality. I mean, you could imagine a world in which there is no prison system and there are no ex-cons. There is no world in which mammals really don't have two sexes. It's something that we came with, evolution sorted that out. It's a pre-existing thing. So the postmodern turn started out as sort of perhaps an almost useful corrective to the notion that there is reality out there and all our words do is describe it, which is just not true. Our words interact with reality and create reality, social realities. And then went far too far and said that there is no reality and there's only the construction of reality.